Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the first episode of my series where I go through all the different albums in my collection, pick one out, talk about why they're special to me, what their appeal is, and what their overall place is in the scheme of hip-hop. I had a difficult time picking an album to start with because there's so many different subgenres, eras, and styles of hip hop that it can be overwhelming, especially if you're kind of a new hip hop fan. So I figured I would just start with some of my personal favorites and kind of work my way through those. And the personal favorite that I chose to start with is LP's solo debut, Fantastic Damage. LP is a producer, rapper from Brooklyn, and he has been a prominent figure in the underground since the mid to late 90s. But despite him being someone that's always been there in hip hop and kind of one of those if you know, you know kind of guys, the last decade of his career, he's really gained the most notoriety and success by teaming up with Killer Mike to form Run the Jewels. They've had multiple albums there, pretty much all of them are amazing. And this collaboration initially stemmed from Rap Music, Killer Mike's 2012 album that LP fully produced. And all the stuff they've done together has been golden, but I still feel like even if that collaboration never happened, LP would have been solidified as one of the best producer rappers in the genre. Not only did he start the legendary alternative hip hop outfit company Flow with Big Juss and Mr. Len, but he also founded the revolutionary underground label Def Jux, and he went on to produce multiple albums for artists under that roster. While CoFlow had a cult classic in the late 90s with their first and only real proper release as a group on Crusher Plus, it was Fantastic Damage that really is where LP came into his own as a solo artist and kind of polished his sound a bit more. He unsurprisingly fully produced this endeavor, and a lot of it was with beats that he had kind of put in his arsenal over the years prior, producing for the various Def Jux related artists. To give a little more background on the wider subgenre that Def Jux and LP fell into at the time, they were sort of the antithesis to what guys like Diddy and Mace were doing, this more commercial style of hip hop. This, in its own right, created a subsection of sort of pretentious, in my opinion, misguided fans who acted like this style of hip hop is automatically better, more intelligent than any other kinds. And while that could be debated to some degree, what really can't be is that LP's very accepting and encompassing of all styles of hip hop, all eras of hip hop. That's something LP has talked about, I believe, on The Breakfast Club. And he talks about how essential it is for the genre moving forward to, not just always look back and not, turn your nose up because things are changing. And I think that attitude is how he's been able to have four amazing albums with Run the Jewels. He addresses these kind of gatekeeping fans on here on Constellation Funk, one of my favorite songs that features Uncommon NASA, who at the time was just known as NASA. And that's another artist that I really enjoy who had a bit of a second win later in his career, similar to LP. And I'll definitely review one of his albums at some point on here, just not as immediate as some of these other ones. But back to the track that he pops up on here, L addresses the type of people who would maybe only have white rappers in their top 5 list by saying, "Rap is quite confusing. I know white rappers who claim they're more artistic and advanced than any inner city tune is. Now you're fucked up and can't move units because you know nothing of the culture that created hip hop music." This is a sentiment I totally agree with because while I do think it's important to keep tabs on what's going on currently in the culture and be open to all the, modern new stuff, it's just as, if not more important, to know about the pioneers of the genre and all the landmark moments through the history. I feel like a lot of channels will either just review new stuff that comes out or review classics on the level of like Ready to Die or things that, I mean, maybe I'll talk about at some point on here. I have those vinyls, but they've been talked about a lot, and I feel like if you're a young kid trying to get into these things and you maybe want to get a bit of like a background on some of these albums and just kind of learn about what these artists are about, or what, the era they were in, what they were trying to talk about. That's kind of what I'm aiming for here. And I'm going to definitely talk about a lot of modern underground or just modern stuff in general, because I'm really trying to show that you could throw a dart at, a dartboard that has all the years that hip hop has existed and hit any one of them. And I can pull multiple albums from my collection from that year. And I don't have every album ever. There's always more that I'm trying to get, that never ending adventure of collecting every hip hop album. I think is great, is like what is so fun about it. I feel like a lot of people treat it like it's a chore to look back at this stuff and learn about it. And if you feel that way, I don't think you're really a fan of it, because you should want to do that. You should want to learn about, these people who created the genre and inspire your favorite artists. That's like such a fun, cool thing to me. So, as someone who's in their mid 20s and honestly didn't really have anybody open this door for me, uh, I just kind of went down that wormhole myself. I'm hoping I can open that door for some other people interested in getting into hip hop. Back to the album at hand, though, one of the things that's always made LP one of my favorite artists in hip hop is how he takes his time to create a specific aesthetic for every album he produces. Not only does he do this with Fantastic Damage, but he does it with The Cold Vein by Cannibal Ox, which he fully produced, and this was worked on and released around the same time as Fantastic Damage, but they have completely different atmospheres. While this album's a bit colder and more calculated, Fantastic Damage is noisy and explosive, and they obviously have some overlapping qualities, but they're both completely separate from anything LP has done since or before that, or really anything I feel like anybody has done. Fantastic Damage blends these kind of futuristic mechanical sounds with like the 80s Fatboy drums and, B-boy samples that makes a really interesting mesh of eras that still sounds really fresh to me today. I think it's with all the AI stuff that's been going on, it has even kind of more of a place in today than it did back then. And his flow and writing style totally complements this MO, because while in the last decade for Run the Jewels he's kind of toned down, this style a little bit and made it kind of match Killer Mike's a bit more. It's not quite as dense and wordy and speedy, but in the early days of his career, he had one of the most interesting and unique deliveries in the whole game. LP is a master both in layering drums and sounds, loading songs with different passages and sections, but he's also a master lyricist who laid down some of the densest verses of the late 90s and early 2000s. While you may not necessarily get a direct meaning from every song here on first listen, there's numerous examples where like a clear theme is established. One of these undeniable moments is TOJ, or Time Out of Joint, which is a touching, warped kind of breakup song. And then there's Stepfather Factory, which is a deep conceptual piece about his mom's abusive boyfriend, which was nowhere near a new topic at this point in his career. But while his first foray into this topic was Last Good Sleep on Fun Crusher Plus, that track is so brutal and heartbreaking, it's really more about getting these repressed feelings out, while Stepfather Factory, he was able to step back and develop the concept a bit more. This idea being that there's a factory of sorts that pumps out stepfathers like they were iPhones, but even with them being built to be perfect, they still come out drunk and abusive. And it's this really poignant piece of music that really shows to me just how skilled and poetic LP is as a writer. And even though that was relatively early in his career, he was doing concepts and executing them in a way really nobody else was. The lead single for this album was Deep Space 9mm, which features an absolutely stellar music video I recommend you watch immediately if you haven't seen. Like most of the things El Producto does, it's highly conceptual and thought-provoking. This song is absolutely littered with quotables. Just one of my favorites includes, "Who wanna hold hands with this sicko malnutritionist soaked in newspeak, dissolve into the syncopated fragments of vinyl splashed on loose leaf, we can embrace on the business end of my face first Joe versus the volcano suicide leap." Fantastic Damage has a pretty quality feature list, but it kind of depends how versed you are on LP or just Def Jux and Rhymesayers in general. We have guys like Aesop Rock, Ill Bill, Rob Sonic, Vast Air, Cage, Camu Tao, Uncommon NASA or NASA as I previously mentioned, Sea Ray's Walls, and Mr. Liff. Most, if not all, of these guys would go on to have successful careers in the underground, either in a group like Weatherman or, as a solo act, like, Cage had a pretty successful solo career. One interesting thing on the feature side of things for me is Vast Air of Cannibal Ox, who some would say had started his decline by now, or maybe on this album. I think some think his features were kind of the start of the descent of his pen. And while I could definitely see where they're coming from, personally, I kind of disagree. I find his verses, he has a couple verses on here, and especially on Dr. Hell No and the Praying Mantis, I find it really fun. His flow and voice, I'm kind of a sucker for it, but LP has one of my favorite verses on there too, and I feel like their back and forth is pretty entertaining. Vast verses on here obviously aren't quite as polished as, his verses on the Cold Vein, but I still think they work for what they are and contribute to the album. I don't think they take away from the album or drag it to a halt. Someone else who delivers one of my favorite verses on here is Aesop Rock, who on DeLorean is going back and forth with LP where they're trading these dizzying verses where it's almost like they're trying to one-up each other on who can name the more ridiculous reference or just one-liner. This song also has another feature by Ill Bill of Nonfiction, who's kind of over the breakdown, and he has a very grimy, vivid verse that I can't really pull anything to say on YouTube because it's not clean enough, but it really fits into this drug-filled dystopia that LP is trying to create here. Overall, this is one of my favorite albums of the early 2000s from someone who's personally on my Mount Rushmore of rapper producers. While it can be challenging at first, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with experimental or alternative hip hop, it's one of those albums that I've listened to hundreds of times and it's just got more and more rewarding the more I listened to it. I found myself just wanting to go back to it constantly when I was first getting into it. And like I said at the beginning, the aesthetic it creates is just so specific, and it really feels like it was prolific, a lot of the stuff he was talking about. I really only listen to albums front to back, like all the way through without skipping. Really, any album I listen to, I don't really ever skip songs if I'm listening to it front to back, because I feel like normally the songs and albums that do end up being the most rewarding, that end up like really meaning something to you, aren't the ones that clicked automatically and were super rewarding on first listen. But while I never skip things, there's sometimes a moment where maybe I won't enjoy a song and I'll, feel tempted to skip it and I don't. But this album doesn't have anything like that on there. I can't guarantee it won't for you, but for me, there isn't a single part that I ever feel like skipping, just front to back. I love every song. If I had to name my three favorite songs from here, it'd probably be Deep Space 9mm, DeLorean, and Tune Mass Dumper. But like I said, they're all so amazing, it's pretty hard to narrow it down. Well, thank you for watching my first review. If there's any album you want me to talk about, leave it down below and I'll see if I have the vinyl or can get the vinyl. Like I said, I only really want to talk about ones that I have the vinyl for. I have like hundreds of hip-hop vinyls, so there's really no lack of albums to talk about. But anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe. As you can tell, I'm new to this, so just bear with me and hopefully it'll suck a little less each time, okay? Okay.